Leaving a beloved franchise in the hands of Disney feels something like inviting Jimmy Savile, the Pope, or Jeffrey Epstein to babysit your favourite child. You vaguely recall that these people were once renowned for reasons not involving child rape, but you're also keenly aware that the buggery of children is now what defines them. There is perhaps a 1 in 200 chance that Epstein might take your child to Disney World or pay for his college tuition, but there is a 199 in 200 chance that he'll stick his Pinocchio up said child Pluto while his friends circle-jerk their Tinkerbells until the genie comes out. Its recent offerings have been almost universally immoral. The MCU has been milked dry. Nothing post-Endgame has been any good at all, with the possible exception of Spider-Man. Ironically, the only thing they haven't done up the wrong has been the series involving a young boy. But it's Star Wars that has been pillaged most thoroughly. Rogue One was brilliant against an exceptionally low bar. By not wrecking the lore, and by showing at least some respect for the history of the franchise and the fans who've sustained it for decades, it provided some brief respite from what was otherwise a long and unbroken chain of violations of the most hideous kind. The sequel trilogy was an unmitigated disaster for reasons too well known and well litigated to reiterate here. The word disaster doesn't do it justice. It was the apotheosis of bad writing, bad planning, and bad intent. There is a species of fungus that impregnates the brains of ants, forcing them to climb atop trees, where they die and allow the spore to sprout. That fungus here is Disney, leeching off the life force of one of history's most beloved franchises until there is no brain, no soul left to eat, and then sprouting from the rotten shell, as though this was some kind of achievement. Everybody involved in this should be in prison. But if you delve beneath the general, beneath the marquee pictures and the multi-billion-dollar travesty of the main films, there are some signs of life. Rey, not Skywalker, might have been given more power than Jesus, but if Star Wars has a true messiah, that man is probably Jon Favreau, with Dave Filoni serving as something akin to John the Baptist. It's no coincidence that Favreau has been intimately involved in Disney's most successful films and series. It was Favreau who masterminded the original Iron Man, forging the Infinity Saga with a stroke of Tony Stark's hammer. And the only live-action Star Wars product to have generated any kind of enthusiasm, to have made fans feel something of what they once felt, back before they were forced to watch Mickey Mouse molesting the desecrated corpse of their childhood, is The Mandalorian, helmed again by Favreau alongside Filoni, who, in the animated series The Clone Wars, and to a lesser extent Rebels, managed to redeem even the prequel era in the eyes of fans who couldn't easily stomach George Lucas's imaginative but deeply flawed feature films. Granted, some of the praise lavished on The Mandalorian overlooked that series' flaws. In the first season especially, the path it followed was well trodden. The series lacked a conventional grand ambition. At its best it was brilliant, but it quite often, to borrow a phrase, played it safe. Its ambition was not to seem ambitious. But critics who point this out miss an equivalent point. What makes Favreau a superlative creator is not his desire to leave his own stamp on an established universe, to force it into new shapes and take it to places it's never been. It's the opposite. And that's a good thing. Part of the problem with the sequel trilogy was precisely the reverse, bringing in talentless hacks who looked at Star Wars and said, how can I make this mine? How can I leave my stamp on the thing? Rather than looking at an established universe and asking, where would I like to go? What would I like to see? What stories exist here that it's my job to tease out, to bring to the fore? Favreau is not an auteur, he's a nerd. He grew up playing Dungeons & Dragons and tabletop RPGs. This gives him a keen appreciation for lore building, and the importance of canon, of what came before. There are two principal approaches to world building, and they mirror, funnily enough, approaches to lore in the legal sense. Under one system, you impose something new, the top rules the bottom. What went before is irrelevant if it is inconvenient to the now. But in the other, law is not made, but rather discovered. The top derives its legitimacy from the bottom. When new cases arrive, the legitimacy of any decision is made by reference to precedent, to what came before. The law already exists. It is simply our job to understand it, to discover it. For the kids at the back, the analogy with world building is this. You either bend the past to your tastes, discarding established law and stories and rules where necessary, or you treat the world as though it already exists, and it's your job to explore it. This is how the MCU was built in its early days, when Favreau was closely involved. Part of the reason that world feels complete but undiscovered is because that's Favreau's approach to writing and filmmaking. And this is his approach with The Mandalorian as well. We've had our fill of the other style, of arrogant individualist hacks in the director's chair, who scorn what came before them and want only to leave their indelible stamp on a franchise to which they feel no loyalty. We've had our fill and we grew sick of it long ago. Star Wars does not need this kind of ambition. It doesn't need to have some definitive new arc to be imposed upon it, to have somebody sitting above it moving the pieces about like the world's least competent god. What it needs is exactly the opposite, a common law approach, an exploration of a world and a universe that already exists, and of which there is so much more to discover. This is what makes The Mandalorian work. It's what makes it popular. It's why the fans actually like it. Yes, there's plenty of fan service, but given the, minds behind the sequel trilogy seem to consider it their mission to give fans the finger at every opportunity, fan service makes for a pleasant change in form. You can't explore a world unless you bring the fans into it and let them look around, and that involves refamiliarizing them with the old haunts and locales and their colourful denizens. The sequel trilogy jumped ahead 30 years precisely because it had no interest at all in continuing to explore the universe. It just wanted to exploit it like a parasite, and claim ownership of what was never theirs and never will be. Those 30 years are some of the richest in all the old expanded universe, which created over decades of hard and dedicated labour, a galaxy with more depth and breadth than even Tolkien managed to create. The New Republic, Luke as Jedi Master, rebuilding the New Jedi Order, the Imperial Remnant, the Thrawn arc, the slowly gathering menace beyond the Outer Rim, the careful build-up to the next great conflict, the careful creation of a new generation of heroes, introduced piecemeal in the stories of established legends, but growing over time into protagonists in their own right, and so on, and so on. The Mandalorian is picking up what the sequel trilogy spurned. Through the eyes of ordinary characters, not the Jedi, not the Sith, but the relatively mundane, the simple men trying to make their way in the universe, it's exploring small parts of a much wider galaxy, during one of the most fascinating periods of a history that already exists, or can be treated as such. The next season of The Mandalorian isn't expected until late next year, but before that we have a number of projects slated, and the most immediate occupies the same space in the same period. The Book of Boba Fett debuts on December 29th this year. We know very little about it, but there are reasons to be, and I can't believe I'm saying this, I'm sure I'll come to regret it, but there are reasons to be cautiously optimistic. And of course there are reasons to be fearful. Favreau and Filoni are again involved. Kathleen Kennedy, the Ghislaine Maxwell of Disney Star Wars, is listed as an executive producer, but I think it's safe to say her involvement will be limited. She's not on the creative team, and will doubtless be off trying to mastermind ways to wreck the rest of the franchise, giving the Force boobs and finding unpopular feminist activists to helm doomed and costly projects, trying to find new excuses for foisting modern political fads on the galaxy with plenty of politics of its own. The trailers for the Book of Boba Fett give little away, and leaks have been admirably few and far between. Encouragingly, the trailers don't have so much as a single stormtrooper in them. Not that I have anything against stormtroopers, they are iconic for a reason, but an over-reliance on them deprives us of a proper exploration of all those aspects of the galaxy the Empire both literally and figuratively suppresses. Tatooine alone has more than its fair share of mercenaries, gangs, and cartels. It's an iconic planet, but its true depths have only really been hinted at in the feature films. There is a lot more to discover. If the premise is as it would appear to be, Boba Fett taking Jabba's throne and reforging a new kind of law on the most lawless of planets, then this allows Favreau to do what he's good at, revealing the depths of a world that wants only to be discovered. Besides the titular character and that totemic armour, we have the pit droids and the Jawas, Jabba's palace, Mos Eisley, the Dune Sea, that beautiful death hum of the seismic charges, the infamous 12 years of Boba Fett's starship, or whatever we're supposed to call it now. You and I will, I'm sure, persist in calling it Slave One. They're also set for a little by way of subverted expectations, but hopefully of the good kind. Boba Fett's style of ruling, as hinted at in the trailers, is not fear, Jabba's way, but respect, perhaps a more Mandalorian flavour of governance. This means the series will have depth. It won't simply consist of Boba Fett being a bounty hunter shooting scum, blowing things up and looking cool. He's a more complex character now, there's more to him, he has a personality. He's no longer an enigma. Again, this might seem simple, but given how iconic the character was before we understood anything very much about him, back when he was the faceless hunter with only a few scenes to his name, one of which being an unfittingly ignominious not-quite death, this actually marks a fairly significant and risky creative undertaking. Not for nothing is there a maxim warning you off meeting your heroes. Now we are meeting the real Boba Fett, the man behind the mask. It involves skill and subtlety, a proper respect both for character building and world building. But again, Favreau is pretty good at this. Unlike Rian Johnson, he doesn't need to symbolically smash the mask to get at the man underneath. The two can coexist, feeding off each other in a symbiotic relationship. There is, of course, a risk here. Unlike Mando, Boba is an established character with a lot of fan investment in him. There's an element of genius involved in removing him from the more consequential doings in the universe. It doesn't so much lower the stakes as it does localize them. Boba here is the story. He's not a prop in the story. And so the broader narrative, the restoration project of the Star Wars universe, is shielded from any failure here better than it might have been had he remained fixed in the plotline of The Mandalorian. But that doesn't remove the risk entirely. Failure would still hurt. It would still drag a fan-favourite character from the heights of the old into the trash compactor of the modern. And God knows we've had too many long-established and well-loved heroes thrown in that trash compactor in recent times. And it seems, again from the trailers, as though we'll be given more than a little bit of backstory too. We already have a partial origin story for Boba in Attack of the Clones, but precious little in between. There is an understandable desire to go back, to see what he did between episodes 2 and 5, and what he did between 6 and now. But there is a danger in going too far back too often, in revealing too much. A large part of Boba Fett's allure is his mystique. He's not a character about whom it pays to learn too much. Removing mystery from him removes more of his character than it reveals. And it provides a powerful temptation to overindulge in fan service, forgetting the story that is yet to be told in favour of cashing in on established imagery, themes, creatures, characters. And that would be a shame, since there is so much that could and should be done with Boba. There is so much of this undiscovered country we can explore through his eyes and through his actions. And we need more of the present than we need of the past. Which isn't to say we should have no backstory whatsoever, but rather that it should be used to provide colour, where necessary, and not that much else. The balance must be in favour of the new story, not replaying bits of the old. I think Favreau and Filoni are more than good enough to avoid this Endor level trap. There are no other writers around better suited to this particular task, and the crossover between The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett by other members of their creative team is encouraging. But we still have to remember that this is Disney Star Wars, and so long as this is Disney Star Wars, it pays to keep your hopes as low as possible. Then you can only be pleasantly surprised, and the very worst that can happen is you get to sit back in your chair, indolently swilling a glass of scotch, or a bottle, saying, "I told you so." If the series bombs, I don't think it will be a fault of the concept, of the premise, of the characters, of the ideas behind it all. I don't think it will be a product of some fault in Favreau and Filoni's love of and respect for the world they've been privileged to steward. It would somehow, in some way, be another break out of that cosmic fungoid parasite that is Disney. They'd better not cock this up.